Hello, my name's Roger Watson. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Nurse Education and Practice, and welcome to this session on open access, predatory publishers and open science. In this session, I'm going to cover recent developments in open access, predatory publishing and open science. I'm also going to cover, as part of open science, preprinting. First, I'm going to look at recent developments in open access. Now, open access is not all that recent. It's become much more common in the last 10 to 15 years. In some subjects, it's been around a great deal longer, but many parts of the world are now insisting that research publications are made available open access under some model, and open access has now become subsumed, certainly in Europe, under the concept of open science, which I'm going to come to at the end. I'm dealing with it here because what I want to deal with next is predatory publishing. And online internet publishing and open access has largely given rise to the predatory publisher movement. Open access, of course, is not necessarily predatory. Open access is a good thing, but the predatory publishers have capitalized on this. So I just want to get that relationship clear here. So open access models. Essentially, there are two models, A on the left and B on the right. A is the subscription-based model, and this is the one that we're most familiar with. It's also called the pay-to-subscribe or the pay-per-view model. And the red bricks around it are supposed to represent a paywall. So you can't legally access the content here unless you've paid for it, and you cannot share it unless you own the copyright. This is the model we're most familiar with in our libraries or our hospitals, where the institution has paid for the subscriptions, either for the journals on the shelves of the library or the ones that you view online. On the right-hand side, the open access models are available under three different models: platinum, gold and green. I'll deal with gold first because this is the original model and it's the one that we're probably more familiar with. Gold open access allows people immediately to access the content of our journal once it's published. However, immediate access is only available with what's called an APC, or an article processing charge, and that, in other words, the author pays to make their access to the journal free for readers. They pay to make it open access under various licenses, which we'll come to in a few minutes. So gold open access costs money directly to the author, and you're paying this money to compensate the publisher for the money that they lose through the subscription-based model. And the amounts of money can be considerable. Anything from $1,000 for some journals up to, I believe, about $9,000, commonly $2,000 to $3,000 US. So it's not cheap, and very few people have got the personal resources to do that. Sometimes institutions do, but rarely, and it's increasingly common to cost open access into research grants. Becoming much more common down here on the bottom is the green open access model, and this is making the final accepted version of the manuscript freely available for people to read. So this is not the final published version. This is the version that you sent to the journal. They say, okay, that's accepted, and then they agree with you, usually, that you can make it open access, usually on a local repository in a university, and it's only available after a period of embargo, which can be anything from 6 months to 2 years. So it's not immediately available, but it is available. And green open access is becoming much more common because, for example, in the United Kingdom, the university funding body insists that all research that's being assessed for research assessment purposes is made available open access, and they accept the green open access model. Up at the top, and newer and very much less common, is the platinum open access model. And here you get immediate open access and no APC is paid. So no money changes hands. The author doesn't pay to make it open access, and people reading it don't pay to access the content. There are not many journals operating under this model. One example is the Wiki Journal of Medicine and the other sets of wiki journals run by the Wikiversity, which is part of Wikipedia. Now, under Gold Open Access, what you get is you get a fully produced and edited and proofread PDF version of your article to share. It looks nice. It's the diagrams are all done properly and they're all in the right place. We all know what final accepted manuscripts look like. They're Word versions of the document usually, with the figures and diagrams at the end. And under Platinum Open Access, the final product tends not to be quite so good as under Gold Open Access. And of course, what you also get under Gold Open Access are online systems for submission, editing, acceptance, and production of your article. Under Platinum Open Access, there's very little money available within those systems, and the systems tend to be quite primitive, frankly. So, to some extent, you get what you pay for. But I must emphasize that none of these are actually free. Green Open Access requires universities to pay money for repository. Gold Open Access, as I've already said, requires authors to pay, and someone has to pay for Platinum Open Access. And the model, for example, with the wiki journals is crowdfunding. Open access is made available through something called Creative Commons licenses. There are many of these. They don't just cover publications, they cover artwork as well and images. There are a series of licenses. There are 6 altogether. This is not the most exciting sort of thing to study, and I'm not going to go into these in detail, but you do have to be aware of what kind of license you are publishing under in order to know how extensively you can share the material, and mostly all material can be shared, to the extent to which you have to attribute the material that you're sharing to others, how much money you can make out of it, if you can make any out of it, and whether it can be changed. So they all have slightly different aspects to them. The most common ones are CC BY and the CC BY share alike. Sometimes they have BYNC, which are non-commercial. In other words, you can't make any money out of selling on the open access content. But as I say, I'm not going to go into this in detail. You can look this up if you want to, if you're interested. But when you come to publishing, just check to make sure the kind of license that you're publishing under. And also some journals do give you a choice, but most of them state which open access license they're using. So how can you decide in which open access journal to publish? Well, the considerations are cost, sustainability, and reputation. Clearly, in terms of cost, it can be very expensive, and if you can't afford it, then you should probably go for green open access or some other model. It is increasingly common now for some journals to be only open access, although most are still hybrid. In other words, they publish under both the pay to view route and the open access route. So if you really can't afford it, then going for a journal, for example, the BMC or PLOS journals, these are quite expensive, so you might not be able to afford it. Sustainability. Don't go for cheap open access. There are some perfectly legitimate small open access publishing companies, but they don't charge very much money, and there could be some doubts about whether or not they're sustainable, and in fact whether or not your content will be available if the company goes bust, basically. So try to stick with the major publishers, either BMC or PLOS or Wiley, Elsevier, Sage, Springer, the big ones. And also the reputation. Well, the reputation generally of open access is still developing, but legitimate open access journals are now beginning to gain impact factors. They're beginning to be listed on PubMed, CINAHL, and Scopus. So the journals are not in. There's no doubt about the reputation of these journals, but you do just have to check and make sure. And I'm going to come back to this later in relation to predatory publishers. If you're in any doubt about the reputation of an open access journal, not necessarily being worried whether it's predatory or not, but about whether it's otherwise got a good reputation, if it appears on the Emerging Sources Citation Index, which is run by Clarivate, then you can be sure that it's got a good reputation. These are journals waiting to be awarded an impact factor. And increasingly, there are journals which are open access, which now are listed with impact factors. So if you find the journal here, then it should be okay. So what about the predatory publishers? Well, if you don't know anything about predatory publishers, they're publishers which try to appear like good publishing companies, but they're not. They're essentially sharks. They're criminals, they're fraudsters, they're out to get your money, and if you publish with them, they'll also have your reputation. This is not the place to go into a great deal of detail about predatory publishers, but they are up to all sorts of tricks to try and entice you in. Everything from creating false editorial boards to claiming that some famous scientist is an editor and they are not an editor. They create fake conferences. They do almost anything, and they're just out essentially to get your money. There's been an incredible growth over the last 10 years or so in the number of predatory publishers, and we're not finished yet. This is a little bit out of date, but you can see the red are the predatory publishers. They continue to grow. The predatory journals that they run continue to grow. In fact, it's now estimated, some people estimate anything up to 10,000 predatory journals, even more. Nobody really knows. And very worrying here, the rise of hijack journals. These are journals which, to all intents and purposes, look identical to a reputable journal, but they're not. And the reason you will know this is that they will ask you for money to submit your article. When you pay for open access, be quite clear, you're paying to make your accepted article open access. You're not paying to get published. So if someone's asking you for money at the submission process, then you can be sure it's a predatory journal. And they also run predatory conferences, always in exotic locations. These are exactly the same companies. You mustn't fall for this, because what happens is you get invited to a conference, undoubtedly told your paper's been accepted and how important you are, and you're asked for a fee. It's usually reasonably modest, but then you go and pay your airfare and you pay for a hotel, you turn up, and very often there's no conference at all, or if there is, there's only a handful of people there. These are criminals. They're out to get your money. We are inundated with these as academics. Anybody who's published will know that. I'm probably worrying you over predatory publishers. Well, don't get too worried. There are some simple steps you can take to try and avoid them. There's a website called Think, Check and Submit, and it gives you some advice about what to think about, what to check and when to submit. Basically, if you've any concerns about a journal, think, stop and think. Is this legitimate? Why are they contacting me? And I, quite frankly, do not respond to any invitations to submit. Reputable journals do not do this. They do not write to you asking you for articles, and they do not write to you promising to publish your article. And any journal that says they've got a rapid peer review system simply cannot be legitimate, because peer review often takes quite a long time. So think, if there's anything suspicious about it, think, check on the Emerging Sources Citation Index, and check in other places, check on reputable databases to see if the journal's there. If you're still in doubt, ask a colleague, and only if you're quite clear it's not predatory, then submit. I know people who've lost money and who've sent really good papers to these journals. You will never get your money back, and you will never get them to withdraw the paper. So you've lost the chance to publish that in a good journal. And some universities and some research institutions are becoming quite punitive towards staff who publish in predatory journals, and quite rightly so. People have no excuse to publish in predatory journals. Now here's a quick checklist produced by someone called Crawford in 2011. Ask yourself these questions. Has the publisher started dozens of new open access titles all at once? That's a sure sign. Do the published titles have very few papers? Some may not have any. Does the publisher send emails asking for manuscript submissions or to serve on an editorial board? If you are asked to serve on an editorial board, it can be a great honour, but you will have a specific personalised email from the editor or from the publisher. It won't be a general email. They normally start with greetings and some obsequious comments about how great you are, but again, you begin to spot these a long way off. Does the publisher fail to disclose the names, qualifications of editorial board members or editors? Is the publisher's address not verifiable? It usually isn't. It's very often in Washington, DC, when these companies are actually based very often in South Asia. And is there very little evidence of peer review? That's a definite giveaway. So any and all of these will indicate that the journal's predatory. If you are concerned about a journal, you can check various places to see if it's listed there. If it's not listed on any of these, I'd be very suspicious. You can check Medline and PubMed. Clarivate, as I've already pointed to, the Emerging Sources Citation Index, also run by Clarivate. Scopus, and the Directory of Open Access Journals. If you've never come across the Directory of Open Access Journals, most good open access journals will be listed here and you can search for them. For example, I used to edit the journal Nursing Open, which is in the middle here. It's listed, it's got a green tick, it says what the APC is, it's $1,650 US. It tells you that it's got double-blind peer review, when it was added to the DOAJ, and some other details. So if you find it here, you can be almost certain that it's a legitimate journal. Again, using the example of Nursing Open, note that the payment is after review and acceptance. You will be prompted to sign the open access agreement form and payment will then be required. So any journal that's asking you to pay before this stage is almost undoubtedly predatory. There are advantages and disadvantages to open access publishing. The advantages are very clear: speed of publication, increased citations, and there's some evidence that open access articles are cited more. They certainly get more attention on social media, and it's easy to share the content. The disadvantages, of course, are the cost, the pollution by predatory journals, and to some extent the reputation of open access is still developing, and predatory publishers are not helping that. And to finish off, some recent developments in open science. Open science is fairly new. It's being driven by the European community in my part of the world, but it applies elsewhere. It covers a great many things. Open access, sharing of data, open peer review, for example. Now here's a definition. Now from Wikipedia, a definition of open science. And I have to say that most major publishers are now complying with open science and doing a great deal to drive it forward themselves. Open science is the movement to make scientific research, including publications, data, physical samples and software, and its dissemination accessible to all levels of an inquiring society, amateur or professional. Open science is transparent and accessible knowledge that is shared and developed through collaborative networks. It encompasses practices such as publishing open research, campaigning for open access, encouraging scientists to practice open notebook science, and generally making it easier to publish and communicate scientific knowledge. While not listed there, it also includes transparent and open peer review processes. There are various places where you can register your research. The Open Science Framework is one such place, but there are others. But you can register your research here in much the same way as you might register a clinical trial, and you can use these databases. They're free to use. You can use them to log your protocols, share your data, and make your final published product available here. So it's quite a good practice to begin registering your research projects in the open science framework and to completing all the things that you can complete there. And there's also the Centre for Open Science. And under open science, recent developments in pre-printing. Pre-printing is not new. In fact, it's quite old in some subjects, particularly in the life sciences, but it's become more common in medicine and in nursing and in many other subjects. Again, from Wikipedia, what's a preprint? In academic publishing, a preprint is a version of a scholarly or scientific paper that precedes formal peer review and publication in a peer-reviewed scholarly or scientific journal. The preprint may be available often as a non-typeset version available free before and or after a paper is published in a journal. So we're all familiar down at the bottom with the published version, and we've talked about the postprint versions. These are the ones that can be shared on green open access repositories. It's now becoming much more common to put up a preprint. This is the initial submitted version of your manuscript, and it's made available freely for people to comment on, but it's also there so people can get access to your data on the understanding that it hasn't yet been peer reviewed and fully published. There are various platforms such as medRxiv and Foursquare and many other ones where legitimate preprinting can take place, and most major publishers are now happy with the authors preprinting their articles. Finally, I'd like to draw your attention to Nurse, Author and Editor, edited by Leslie Nichol on behalf of the International Association of Nursing Editors, also known as INANE, and this journal is supported by Wiley. The contents are free. You can sign up for alerts, but you can access them directly. Most of the content is written by editors, sometimes on very prosaic issues, such as how to write an introduction and how to start a discussion section of a manuscript, but also issues like open access, predatory publishers, and aspects of publication ethics. So I'd strongly urge you to sign up to Nurse, Author and Editor. So thank you very much for listening. That's my email address. If you have any questions or comments, you can check my own publication record on ORCID, and you can follow me on Twitter, or you can keep in touch with me by WeChat. I hope you found that useful. Once again, thank you very much for listening.